We're going to continue our introduction to Animal Farm by looking at the genre defined. We want to look specifically at the meaning of allegory, satire, and fable and how they relate to our story, Animal Farm. The fable is one of the oldest literary forms, older than a novel or a short story. A fable is usually short and it conveys a clear moral message. The earliest fables date back to the 6th century Greece, and the author of the fables was Aesop. And I'm sure many of you growing up have heard of Aesop's fables, which uses animal characters to stand for human types. For example, the fox character in a fable would embody the human characteristic of a person who is cunning and clever. The most popular animal fables of the 20th century were Just So stories, which was published in 1902 by Rudyard Kipling. And these were taken by Disney and put together into the Jungle Book, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And Orwell admired Kipling and the Just So stories, and they seem to have influenced Animal Farm as we know it. So we have characterization in fables, and some of these storybooks that you're seeing popping up on the screen here are ones that perhaps your parents read to you when you were little, or maybe they're in your library at home. We already know that a fable is a narration intended to enforce useful truths. Fables have two important characteristics. They first teach a moral lesson, and secondly, the characters are most frequently animals. And the animal characters often function as a device to point out follies in humankind, or the weaknesses that humans have, because the animal will show it. So allegory, where does this term fit in? Well, we know that most fables have two levels of meaning. We have a surface meaning, which is about the animals. It's an animal story. But then on a second level, the animals stand for types of people or ideas. The way the animals interact and the way the plot unfolds says something about the nature of people or the values of ideas. And any type of fiction that has these two different levels of meaning is called an allegory. And we saw this when we read Golden Kite, Silver Wind. We had the story on one level, which was happening between the two Chinese villages, but then the much deeper level in application to what was happening in the Cold War in the 60s. So an allegory is a piece of fiction that has two levels of meaning. Animal Farm is a strong allegory. On the first level, the story is about the animals and what's happening with them. You can be upset when Boxer is taken away by the horse slaughter without being too aware of what he stands for. So you can understand the animal story there. But at the same time, each of the animals does serve as a symbol. And the story's second level involves the careful critique Orwell constructed to comments on Soviet Russia. So there's two levels to this story. We have an animal story, and then there's the symbolic story that relates to Soviet Russia. The pigs not only represent specific tyrannical Soviet leaders, and our pigs are Squealer, Snowball, and Napoleon, but they can also symbolize tyranny more broadly. Their qualities are therefore not simply the historical characteristics of a set of actual men, but are the qualities of all leaders who rely on repression and manipulation. Then there's satire. In satire, the writer attacks a very serious issue by presenting it in a ridiculous light or poking fun at it, making it look totally stupid and ridiculous. Orwell uses satire to expose what he saw as the myth of Soviet socialism. Thus, the novel tells a story that people of all ages can understand, but also tells us a second story, that of real-life revolution. Then we have irony, and Orwell gives us two kinds of irony here. First, we have situational irony, where there's a disparity in what we would expect to happen and what actually happens. And there's dramatic irony in that as the viewer or the reader of the story is seeing how the pigs behave, and we can see how corrupt they are and how decadent they are. But the other animals within the story, they don't get that picture of them, and they're following right along with them. But as the reader or viewer, we can see that. So here in this slide you have two pictures from the movie. Snowball, who is below the commandments that you can see written above him on the wall, which is a scene in the story. And then you have Napoleon, who's another pig who's pigging out. So you can see probably that the choice of the pig character is significant when representing these leaders. So this ends our definition of fable, allegory, and satire, and then of course irony is thrown in. So part 3 gives us an introduction to where there are historical links to the different characters or the different animals.